Prologue. The forest was on fire. This was the base of the organization, the Forest of Death, where any human could come to kill each other. Cough. A man missing the lower half of his body struggled on the edges of the forest. While coughing blood, he grasped Myung's ankle and shouted, For what reason did you destroy the Forest of Death? For 40 years you killed thousands of people with us, so why now? Myung, wearing a black robe smeared with blood, quietly looked down at the man and said, Weren't we all already non-existent? The group living in the furthest corner of the world. That was the Forest of Death. Since they were never able to tread in the light, they did not exist. It was just a disappearance of people who already didn't exist. There was nothing strange about this. Finally, everything was quiet. It was because the man grasping his ankle, the leader of the Forest of Death, had breathed his last breath. As he gazed at the abundance of bodies surrounding him, Myung thought, if I was given the choice, would I have lived a different life? Too many had died. Even the blood of the innocent were spilled by his hands. Living a different life, it was probably impossible. It was hard to imagine living with someone with his pungent smell of blood. But Myung fell to his knees. There were various holes strewn throughout his body. It was surprising that he still didn't die after losing so much blood. Even though he had the finest training in the Forest of Death, it was too difficult to assassinate hundreds of experienced fighters and the leader by himself. It's been a long road. He forcefully brought the edges of his lips up. He couldn't even remember his real name or how to smile anymore. But 40 years ago, Myung had been just a common university student on Earth. Once he was summoned to the underworld, everything changed. The underworld. This world that was ruled by 72 demon gods was no different from hell. For a long time, humans were slowly summoned to the underworld. It was the same for him. Without any time to adjust, he was left to protect himself against monsters. He couldn't even trust other humans. For decades, humans existed in this world. They treated other lives as if they were worthless. To protect this belief, small organizations and bases like this were even established. Myung was kidnapped by the Forest of Death as soon as he arrived in the underworld. From then he was put under drugs and brainwashed into killing others. The people who could have been the hope of humanity were killed in this way. Even after he was released from those methods, he already lost the guilt of killing others. He had gone too far to live amongst others. But even this path was now at its end. Myung lifted his head. It will probably be the last time I get to see a sky like this. The sky above his head was incomparably clear. Hook. Myung opened his eyes. His whole body was covered with cold sweat. As he wiped his sweat, he took a deep breath. Who? He slightly frowned as he felt something strange. How am I able to breathe? He definitely remembered dying after wiping out the Forest of Death. He was also aware that his heart stopped when he took his life. Am I alive? But what is this vividness I am feeling right now? Even doctors who have reached heavenly levels wouldn't have been able to heal him. It was definite that he was going to die. But he didn't. The heart he thought that had stopped was thumping harder than ever. All his senses of smell, hearing, touch, taste and sight were normal. These weren't the only weird points. He turned his head. There were almost 50 people around him. Where is this? I was definitely working at my company? Mommy. There were many different types of people, ranging from children to the elderly. Myung had seen this before. It was a vague, faded memory, but this was the scene he saw 40 years ago when he was first summoned into the underworld. He also remembered the hell that happened afterwards. I don't have any calluses, he thought as he examined his hands. The rough calluses that were formed from using weapons for 40 years were nowhere to be seen. The scars and wounds that were riddled throughout his body were gone as well. Everything is refreshed. The past events he had endured were gone like it never happened. Even the great Myung was taken back. Did I return? It was hard to believe. Time traveling. But if this truly is the past, then I might know where this is. The Blue Temple. A half-destroyed temple. It was the place where people who are summoned arrive first. He has to survive here for a month to reach the next stage. I guess it'll come up soon. Myung gazed in front of him. Shortly, the expected phrase floated up. What? It's telling us to choose weapons? Fuck. What's that supposed to mean? While everyone was confused, only Myung moved out. Of the 100 weapons strewn along the wall, he grasped a shining blue weapon. Then a message appeared in front of him. Name, Scimitar of Strength. Rank key. Classification, Flange mounted. Endurance 300. Effect, strength +1. Ha! It was the same as before. If there was a difference, it would be that he reacted and moved faster than others. Everyone turned to look at Muyang. Soon, out of nowhere, an armor made out of leather floated in front of him. Muyang wordlessly packed the armor. Completing the missions fast is good. That way he could receive these extra rewards as well. The underworld was swelling with various monsters. A regular human was unable to survive in this environment. That was the reason why there was the Law of Solomon. The underworld was created by the 72 demon gods trapped under Lemegeton, note, Lesser Key of Solomon, as they wake up. Baal, Agars, Ammon as well as the other demon gods were the strongest among the monsters. Solomon, who originally trapped the 72 demon gods, predicted this outcome and, to give humanity hope, forcefully made this system to fight against the 72 demon gods. But the real enemies were the humans. That was right. The enemy of humans were humans themselves. The work Muyang carried out was of the same nature. People with promising futures or those that would be of a hindrance were requested to be eliminated by the forest of death. Because of that small belief, they became narrow-minded. Since he arrived 40 years in the past, 20 years from now, the will strike and summon all of humanity to the underworld. That was when the demon gods would make their move. However, to protect their small belief, humans hid their trump cards in fear of losing them and were divided and eventually conquered. Even then, the amount of people requesting assassinations from the Forest of Death never dropped. By the time Muyang destroyed the Forest of Death, humanity was already on the brink of defeat. Isn't it best if we all chose a weapon? A woman gave her opinion. They all remembered the words and the leather armor floating in front of them. They realized that this wasn't just a trivial matter. But they were a step too late. Screech. 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 As the temple doors opened, 2-meter-tall birds were slowly flying towards them. Because their tails always emit fire, they were monsters known as the fire eagles. These eagles used their long sharp beaks to tear out the human guts. A good number of 100 fire eagles landed. It has begun. Muyang calmly gazed at his surroundings. Caw. What is heck is that? The fire eagles, fearless, entered the temple and started their attack. Only 5 people were able to react quickly to the situation and grabbed a weapon. Arg. A big, unarmed man standing at the front was the first to be eaten. He died as soon as a fire eagle stabbed him through his throat with its beak. Afterwards, 3 fire eagles sat down and started to feast on the man's carcass. Save me. Please. It was total madness. Hell had arisen. It could be said that dying here could even be a blessing. Muyang was cool-headed. If they couldn't handle this sort of situation once they were out in the underworld, they would meet even more terrifying ends. If he was to save them with half-baked sympathy, it wouldn't last long. If he wasn't going to take care of them until the end, it was better to not start in the first place. Also, with the body he returned to, he was unable to eliminate all 100 of the fire eagles. The fire eagles aren't capable of doing 2 things at once. Especially when they were eating, they do not pay attention to their surroundings. To defeat the swarm of fire eagles, a few people had to be sacrificed. Although he returned to the past, he still kept the accumulated experiences he gained in the past 40 years. And though his body was not like before, he expected that he will adjust to it quickly. Even though these birds will return once they are full. If that was to happen, he wouldn't be able to get any reward. Swish. He cut the head of the oncoming fire eagle. Screech. Will the eagles rage once they see their companion die? Of course not. Surprisingly, a few eagles flew down to feast on the guts of their dead comrade. These bastards would even revert to cannibalism to sate their hunger. It was because at this moment they were at their hungriest. For this reason, it wasn't hard to fight against the eagles. If he was alone, it would have been difficult, but there was prey all around him. While the eagles were preoccupied with eating, he had to take them down one by one. Hey, that guy is fighting. Everyone lift your weapons and fight. The throat. Aim for the throat. Everyone was in a panic. Fortunately, it seemed like there was someone who was thinking straight. After observing Muyang's actions, the person started to lead the others. The 5 people who picked out weapons from the wall earlier led others to also pick their weapons. But there were also a few who didn't move. Like the voice said, if there are only 30 people left, the birds will return. I can't do it. I won't. They were the ones that were too frightened to act. But did they know that if they don't hold a weapon they become the main targets of the fire eagles? If I was given the choice, would I have lived a different life? Myung thought that all the time. He drew a different image of himself, not as a member of the Forest of Death. A dream that could never be achieved. But by some miracle he was brought back to the past and was given a choice. At least this time I won't be used by others. I am tired of doing other people's bidding. The scimitar was smeared with blood. Almost 100 fire eagles were spread across the floor. What the fuck is this? Fuck. Wawa mommy. Cries and curses existed everywhere. All of the fire eagles had been killed, but so many humans had also died in the process. Including Myung, 51 people had arrived at the temple. However, only 38 people were currently alive. 13 had died from fighting the fire eagles. Quite a few survived. Although he couldn't remember the exact number, not nearly as this many people had survived back then. At most half. It was definitely different from the past. Of course, it was mostly because Myung alone was able to clear about half of the number of fire eagle. A watch with a strange shape appeared on their left hands. There was only a pentagram on the face of the watch which didn't show the time. Status viewers were very important. If it was not a person you completely trust, you should never show them your watch. If you lose it, you can steal someone else's and overwrite it, but then you will lose your entire history you saved up. Therefore it was best for you to not lose it if you could. Myung remembered looking at the watch of the people he had killed. For some odd reason his only hobby was collecting these watches. Thanks to this, he had more information than anyone else. He even assassinated people who were thought to be impenetrable. As he turned the small bump on the side of the device, a hologram only viewable to the user appeared. He first looked at the abilities, and then the hologram changed to show something else. Achievement effect - none. Class effect - none. Strength 11, 10 plus 1. Agility 13. Stamina 9, Intelligence 9, Wisdom 8. Special note: none. As he had equipped the scimitar of strength, his strength increased by 1. If it wasn't for the scimitar, his strength would have only been 10. These stats were incomparable to the ones he had in the past. But he didn't care. If he could just think over his past, he knew he could get stronger faster than anyone else. Prize equals water producing magical item, food supply for 5 days, an unknown item, known only by the owner. Prize equals rank E plus weapon, options available, food supply for 4 days. Third best hunter. Oh Ji-young for fire eagles. Prize equals rank E weapon, options available, food supply for 3 days. Does the system only show the name I remember? Myung was the name appointed to him during the days he was a trainee at the Forest of Death. He remembered using a totally different name when he was a university student in the past. As a side effect from the continuous brainwashing and drugs, he had forgotten a lot of important information. Being Myung is enough. He shook his head slightly. The choices he would make in the future were more important. What he had to do, what he was going to achieve. The name was a minor part. A little later, 3 items appeared above his hand. Water-producing magical item, food supply for 5 days, and the extra reward paranormal, have been received. These magical items were talismans that held different kinds of materials and mysterious skills. Unlocking the seal of Lemagittan didn't only release the 72 demon gods. The laws overruling this world changed and different types of magical items were created everywhere. This was arranged by Solomon. The hope of humanity forcefully created to give strength to those who fight against the 72 demon gods. Not bad for the first earnings. The water-producing magical item will surely be helpful from now on. Not just in the Blue Temple but in the underworld, it was always hard to find fresh water. Myung concentrated on the yellow talisman he had and information relating to the object appeared. Name: water-producing magical item. Rank: V. Classification: continuous use. Effect: able to produce 10 L of water every day. Even though there was a 10 L limit, it was still a lot for him to drink by himself. All the items were ranked from EX, S, A, B, C, D, E, F in order from the best to the worst. If an item was D ranked, then it was one of the best items you can get in the beginning. Not to mention it was a magical item. The food supply for 5 days appeared in a small box. Inside there were loaves of bread under a preservation spell. Myung gazed at his bonus item. Paranormal. An accessory with a spell. Were you able to get something like this at Blue Temple before? Paranormal was a red ring. Name, paranormal. Rank, V. Classification, A. Keepable type. Durability, max 5 times 5/5. Effect. For 10 minutes the user can choose to increase all their ability +2, use healing wave or fire bolt. As he looked at the information he nodded his head. Depending on when he used it, it could be quite the game changer. In a dangerous situation the item could be used as the deciding blow. The fact that it was much harder to find decent accessories than weapons made paranormal an amazing treasure for now. As he wore the accessory on his left hand, people came up to him. Excuse me. 2 women and 5 men. From the group, the man who was standing in front of them spoke. A group has already been made. It was an action worth applauding. The man instinctively knew they had to stick together to live and wanted him to join them. He seemed quite calm. Are you experienced? What if I am? Of course. My name is Kim Taehwan. And your name is? Kim Taehwan. I knew I saw him somewhere. He was second in the previous ranking. Looking at the sharp longsword he was holding, he probably chose it as a reward this round. Are you referring to me? Yes, as there is no one in front of me besides you. Kim Taehwan impudently laughed. But Myung didn't feel like getting involved with them. So he replied briefly. Yongso, 1. Taehwan's expression stiffened. Taehwan would probably think that he was being played around with. Even though he wasn't going to treat him seriously, he thought about the word continuously before telling him. In the past, Myung killed a countless number of people. From the people that he killed, there were soldiers and people who could have been recognized as heroes. For example, the Dragon Lord who tamed a magical dragon and Queen of Frost Wind, Kim Hana, and so forth. If those people were to be alive today, the humanity would not have been destroyed that easily. They should still be alive. They were few of the toughest opponents I had to assassinate. Especially the Dragon Lord, it took him a whopping 3 years. The magical dragon that was by his side was one of the strongest monsters in the underworld, with great perception. Even the Dragon Lord himself was one of the top 10 human beings living in the underworld. Therefore, even 3 years was considered quite short against someone like him. Anyhow, he will not deny the things he had done in the past, but he now has the chance to change what he had done. Since he now had the chance, Myung decided to live a more meaningful life this time. Yong Sa. Then what is your last name? Lee Yong Sa? Park Yong Sa. Was he saying that to joke with me? Myung turned away. My last name is Yong. First name is Sa. Anyone who saw them would know that he was ignoring him. Haha. You're funny. However, Taehwan laughed. Myung was now admiring him in his own way. This dude. He will survive quite a while. Even in this situation he decided to laugh. When he thought about it, the Blue Temple in the past might have had someone like him. However, Myung didn't really care. Even from the beginning he wasn't someone who could socialize well with others. Nor did he ever have the time. Depending on how one used their time in Blue Temple, it will drastically change their starting point outside of the Blue Temple. Only the people who use their time wisely will be able to survive the underworld. It was the only way to dodge the hands of the Forest of Death. Unlike the past, he refuses to be kidnapped helplessly. As Myung started to walk away cold-heartedly, the other people around Taehwan Kim started to get enraged. Hey! Yong Sa? Wow, Mr. Kim, just leave someone like him alone. Yeah. He has no basics. As Taehwan Kim decided to follow him, the other members of the group tried to stop him. It seemed that these people have formed a group with Taehwan as the core and had already agreed on a few things. And as they were pushed to their limit, there had to be someone who they could place their hatred on. As Myung heard their fuss, he just shook his head. It's not like grouping up will be best for them. If you couldn't trust each other, it was best not to group up. In reality, didn't most of the 9 great guilds and the 5 great clans get destroyed because of their internal conflicts? They were unable to trust each other and later they were unable to trust themselves. If this was the case, then how can a group of people trust each other when they just met each other? As time passes, the intensity of trials would only get stronger, and within these people, there will be some who had hit rock bottom. He would rather act alone than to see them in that state. First, I need to build my body. The body that he had right now was very shabby. With this body he couldn't achieve anything. The Myung in the past had seen a great number of other people's histories to know the way of attaining important items only available at the Blue Temple. Secret classes. Normal people were only able to achieve one class. However, Muyang was able to get 4 different classes with different tendencies. The leader of the Forest of Death called it universal type characteristics. This allowed him to act freely in any situation. In the past, through the leader's policy, he had attained the classes of warrior, mage, ranger, and priest. Well, if he was to learn 4 different secret classes, he would be an expert with no apparent weaknesses. Secret classes were so powerful and dangerous that Solomon decided to hide their existence. And one of the classes was available in the Blue Temple. If I remember correctly, it was the Necromancer class. There was a person who threatened others using an army of undead. The lunatic necromancer Kim Gil-young. By himself he killed thousands of people, made the dead join his force and developed even greater strength. When fighting a large group of people, it was a class with an absolute advantage. Even so, Muyang slit his throat. During a war, he used his extreme hiding abilities to creep up to him and cut his throat. Drunk on blood, it was his fault not being cautious. Afterwards, Muyang remembered taking his watch to look at his history. First, I need to get the Necromancer class. Instead of allowing Gil-young Kim to get Necromancer class, it was much better to keep it for himself. Thud. Muyang kept striking the scarecrows located outside the Blue Temple. Every day monsters would try to raid the temple, but for the past 3 days starting from the first day he never forgot to strike the scarecrow. Doesn't that guy get tired? There are all kinds of weirdos in the world. All the people around him were amazed at how hardworking he was, but no one stepped out to train with him. They were already exhausted after fighting off a monster raid every day. No one was willing to overwork themselves with all that training. To them it seemed foolish for Muyang to push himself so hard. It was also incredible that he kept getting the best hunter title, but since he never mingled with anyone, there was no one to compliment him for it. If anything, there were people who were revolted by the fact he wouldn't share his rations or water with anyone. But Muyang didn't care about that. Before befriending others, to him, it was more important to prioritize getting stronger. And in his own way he felt confident in his decision. I can raise my strength and stamina up to a maximum of 20 using these scarecrows. Everyone knew about this in the underworld, but it was impossible for these newly summoned people to know it. Knowledge is power. And at this moment Muyang had the most knowledge out of all the people here. He never thought about sharing this knowledge. For people who needed to be spoon-fed information, there was no way they would survive in the underworld anyways. To survive, one had to have quick wits, decisiveness, and most importantly have perseverance. Why the hell is he doing that? Let him be, let him be. There's not much to eat anyways. The people next to Muyang copied his actions but gave up quickly. Thud. He raised his attack speed. They would have had to hit the scarecrow at least 10,000 times to see results. It was a battle with himself, but to him this was nothing. For every 100 recruits, only 1 or 2 survived the Forest of Death's training, and he survived. I need my strength and stamina to be at least 20 to attempt it. A secret class was obtained once you overcame the impossible. Even in the past, there were no more than 100 people with a secret class. But they all had logic-defying strength. Of course, there was an equivalent amount of risk involved, but it was definitely worth the risk. And to achieve the secret class, Necromancer, it required you to first train your body to a certain level. Muyang looked over. He saw the tall cliffs that surrounded the Blue Temple. Up on those unending cliffs somewhere there was a nest. To become a necromancer he would have to climb the cliffs, while fighting off hordes of monsters and kill the 5 gatekeepers. As of now that goal was still far off. Once one leaves the temple, fighting orcs and gnolls were common, but if you were unlucky you might meet the giant Leo, a lion-type predator. So killing the 5 gatekeepers was too difficult for beginners. Besides strength and stamina, I also need a weapon. After defeating the raid of monsters every day, they would receive rewards dependent on their performance. The reward for killing the boss monster that comes every 10 days was enough to offset the previous day's rewards. It meant that bosses were that much stronger, but he wanted to move out after he had at least killed the first boss. Excuse me. Just then 2 women approached Muyang. Although they looked a bit messy, they had a much better appearance than the rest. They were 2 university students with heavy makeup on. The one with long straight hair and who was adorably clenching her fist spoke. He hit the scarecrow a bit more softly. Is there any meaning to hitting them? Thud. But Muyang only continued with his actions. He hit concisely with no unnecessary movements. The The scarecrow shook dangerously. Aren't you going to answer me? The girl stepped right next to the scarecrow. She lowered her gaze with a pitiful expression. On top of that, her white blouse exposed her bare shoulders. That scene would have enchanted most men. She had that level of beauty, and in reality, a few of the surrounding men gave Muyang jealous stares. Fuck off. But that wouldn't work on Muyang. To Muyang, who passed the harsh training of the Forest of Death, that level of seduction was like a child acting cute. That wasn't all. One of the things people had to be most cautious of in the underworld were beauties. Listening to Muyang's reply, the girl staggered as if her pride was hurt. Then she lowered her head and knit her brows. Crazy bastard. Is he a eunuch or what? Kim Soyoung was not used to this sort of treatment, as there weren't many men who would just abruptly tell her to fuck off. She was one of those commonly known idols of her school. Men would line up just to have a chance to hold her hand. She knew she was pretty, and because she thought she had such worth, she had extremely high standards for men. She didn't even consider doctors, lawyers, or attorneys as much. If it wasn't for being summoned here, she would have been enjoying a drive in a sports car after an extravagant dinner. He should be thanking her while shedding tears for talking to him, but he dares to tell her to fuck off? Just because you know how to fight a bit. The reason why she approached him was because he seemed like a lone wolf. Although she said he could only fight a bit, she knew it was quite the opposite. During the past 3 days, they were constantly subject to life-threatening situations. They knew that there were more monsters waiting for them outside the temple. To be physically strong was the biggest asset in this situation. Even more so, the man in front of her resembled a wolf that would tear apart all the monsters he faced. He didn't approach others, and because of his special aura, no one could approach him. She thought if it was this man, she would allow him to be with her for a while. But from the start, her plan was trampled by him. She refused to give up. She lifted her head and straightened her clothes. She revealed her enchanting smile and said, "Aren't your words a bit too harsh? Even I would be a bit hurt." Muyang stopped for a moment. His expressionless gaze fell upon her. She took that as a signal and told him, "I've seen your performance for the past few days. People talk about ep1. Oh, I can call you Appa, right? Anyways, people talk about Appa a lot." She stealthily came closer and slightly brushed her hand against his. There was no man who could resist this kind of physical contact. "When would you have ever held hands with someone as pretty as me?" Muyang's appearance was normal, a guy with very average looks. If it was an ordinary day, she would never meet someone with his appearance, no matter what other qualifications he had. She believed that he only said those harsh words because he didn't know how to act in front of a beauty like her. He's good at fighting and was originally living in the temple, but he is a bit greedy. But don't worry about it, Appa. They are all cowards who can't say it to your face. Also, because you kill so many monsters, isn't it natural you receive the most rewards? Eye contact. She tried to laugh as naturally as she could while gazing at his eyes. It could be said that that was the finishing move, but as soon as she looked at Muyang's eyes, she felt her body tremble slightly. For human eyes to be like that. There was not a hint of emotion in his eyes. His eyes didn't waver like other men would when they looked at beautiful women. His eyes were endlessly abyss. It was hard to explain the terrifying sight. Finally, Muyang opened his mouth. "Are you done talking?" "Yes." Why yes I am." "Then fuck off." "What did you say?" "Punch." Muyang shattered the scarecrow's face. Her intentions were obvious, and he didn't have the time to listen to her. There was less than a month left. Once the month was up, the gate to the underworld would open. And then, big guilds like the Forest of Death and the 5 great clans will be waiting for them. If he doesn't want to be pushed around by them, he had to increase his strength even by a tiny bit. "If you try this again, I'll make your face the same as the scarecrow," he quietly whispered into her ear. He said he would become a soldier, but that didn't mean he would try to save everyone. If anyone stands in his way, he won't hesitate to get rid of them. "I am not a good man. Maybe an evil one." Because he had gone too far down the road, he could never be a good man. Not that he wanted to become one. Hiccup. Soyoung hiccuped. That was right. He was like the embodiment of a wolf. Rough and untamable. Hiccup. Hiccup. The strength in her legs slowly weakened. Muyang's stare was so terrifying she couldn't move. "So Soyoung, are you okay?" Eventually, the girl who came with her dragged her away by her wrist. He turned his head away after looking at Soyoung being dragged across the ground. Thud, thud. He started to hit the scarecrow again. If I get a high ranking during the boss raid, I might get a pretty good reward. The bosses that come every 10 days were difficult. No matter how well they fight, a few will inevitably die. But if he was able to gain an overwhelming victory over the boss, he might receive a weapon of rank C or higher. A C rank is sufficient. To defeat the monsters while climbing the cliff, a rank C weapon was more than enough, as he had the experience to fill the gap of having a lesser weapon. 5 days have passed. At this point there were only 32 survivors left. After 13 deaths on the first day, 1 to 2 people died every day thereafter. Everyone had become desperate after they learned that they will die if they didn't fight. But not everyone was useful. Let's reduce our numbers. Jiyoung, he who was consistently ranked third the past few days, spoke up. He was a man in his mid-late 20s with a shaved head and tattoos all over his body. His appearance made others feel threatened. There were a few people around him. What do you mean by numbers? Among them, a man asked while gulping down his saliva. Jiyoung crossed his arms and said, "There's not enough food, but there are too many useless bastards." Only the top 3 hunters were given food. Even though it was just crumbly bread under preservation magic, it was the most important supply in this place. Up until now, Taehwan and Jiyoung evenly distributed the bread, but there was a limit to that. The already small supply of food was distributed among 30 people. Each person was pretty much living off of half a loaf of bread each day. A few people in the temple flinched. After someone had died in agony eating grilled monster meat, no one had put their hands on the monster carcasses. Bread was their sole salvation, but if Jiyoung cut their supply, many people will have no option but to starve. In this world, starvation led to death. Jiyoung smiled as he said, "So let's have the useless bums fight each other or whatever and reduce the numbers." "Oh Jiyoung." Taehwan approached him. Jiyoung snorted at him. "Don't try to be a hypocrite. Didn't we do enough for them already? Our goal is to keep everyone alive. That's why, you thick bastard. Let's get rid of the useless ones. You see that guy with the kid? What can he do when he has no arms? It'll be good if he could at least serve as a meat shield." Jiyoung. Taehwan raised his voice. There was no choice. It was only a hard decision to make the first time, but afterwards, it would only get easier. If they started to get rid of the useless people, then there will only be a minority left at the end. Taehwan was on guard. If their conscience died and only the self-centered people lived, the surviving group will eventually collapse. Jiyoung picked his ears. "Teeth, your voice is fucking loud. Even though you're okay with it, I'm pretty sure most aren't happy with the current arrangement." Jiyoung looked away from Taehwan and gazed at the people around them. Everyone looked quite malnourished as their cheeks started to cave in. There was a clear distinction between the useful and the useless. The people who were of some use started to glare at the ones who weren't as useful. It wasn't just 1 or 2 days, it seemed like the dissatisfaction piled up during the past few days. They just couldn't voice their complaints since the food was only distributed to the top 3 hunters. It wasn't like Taehwan was unaware of the situation. We have to find a solution. If we start thinking about throwing others away, how are we different from the monsters? We are humans with reason. We need to help each other out. It's not like you're going to drop food when you die. Whatever, if you really want to take care of everyone, do it yourself. From now on, I am going to take care of myself." Jiyoung shrugged his shoulders. The food he distributed the past 5 days was still a considerable amount. There was no reason for him to stick his neck out for others when it wasn't his responsibility. But in Taehwan's position, this wasn't pleasant news. "Jiyoung, if you stop, many people are going to starve. So what? It's hard for me to live too. Or..." Jiyoung brought out a loaf of bread and quickly munched on it while looking at the crowd. "Let's have a bartering system. I am not that cold-hearted, you know. If you give me a reasonable payment, I will trade it for bread. Or become someone useful to me. Yeah, I think I can feed up to 6 people." The reason why he decided on a specific number was simple. He wanted to make his own faction. In a place like this, power was the law. There was strength in unity. Although they were unified, up until now it was just a public declaration. It didn't have the same influence as a faction. So he was waiting for this moment. Jiyoung was spectating the whole situation from afar. Jiyoung. He was quite the sly fellow. He deliberately waited 5 days. If he was to make this announcement when everyone was starving, there were definitely people who would cling on to him. To be part of the 6 people, He knew they would do all sorts of things to flatter him. On the other hand, the leftover faction led by Taehwan wouldn't have the same unity. Taehwan tried to accept everyone. It didn't matter if they had any capabilities. Of course, the dissatisfaction among the capable will definitely rise and they will start to side with Ji Young's faction, which centered on power. Like how Ji Young deliberately waited 5 days before making a statement like this. He was someone who was able to calmly analyze his surroundings and act at the right moment. While goading Taehwan, seemed like he was well versed in human psychology. Ji Young was waiting with a completely relaxed attitude. How about me? Soon after, someone raised their hand. Kim Sung. After getting embarrassed by Mu Young, she decided that this time she would try and join Ji Young. You. What can you do? Just because you're a bit pretty, you think I am going to give you my hard-earned food? She was flustered as she thought that he would definitely accept her. But she quickly calmed herself and accentuated her chest. I can do various things for you. Anything you can imagine. Anything, you say. Ji Young skimmed over her body. It felt like a snake was slithering around her body, but she endured it. For the past 5 days she took various of steps to survive. First, she searched for the person who she thought would survive the longest. That was the reason why she approached Mu Young in the first place. But it ended as a failure and her next target became Ji Young. Although he was a cold-hearted good-for-nothing, his skills were quite top-notch. Taehwan seemed a bit muddled, so it didn't seem like he would last very long. If I make this man a king, then I can be the queen. So she decided to make Ji Young a king. Once she decided on someone, that person had to become the very best, was what Soyoung thought. Ji Young smacked his lips lasciviously. Sure. I will make an exception for you, but for the rest I will have strict requirements. Ah, you must be hungry, have some food while you wait. Thanks. As soon as Soyoung stood behind Ji Young, he handed her a loaf of bread. She chomped on the bread and ate it as if it was the most delicious food in the world. She knew she would lose some face, but she also knew that if she did this, it would tempt more people to join. Many people gulped down their saliva while they watched her eat. Me. Will you accept me? If you need to do something that requires strength, you'll need someone like me. Instead of a guy like him, I'm a much better choice. The responses came down like hail. Like a flood, a crowd of people went over to Ji Young's side. Kim Taehwan and Oh Ji Young. There was a clear distinction between the people who joined each side. Ji Young, it's not good to split into 2 groups. As Taehwan spoke with a firm voice, Ji Young just clicked his tongue. Just worry about your future, Kay? There was no way for him to stop the momentum. Ji Young started to recruit members and the chosen held their heads up high as if they have been chosen to become nobles. Ranks were being established. Taehwan's save everyone policy didn't appeal to many. More and more people began to think that it would be better to get rid of the useless ones. Breakthrough. That's what he needed. He looked at Mu Young. Mu Young never lost his first place position in the rankings. He had the most food, yet whenever Taehwan asked him for help he was ignored. However, it wasn't like they could forcefully take it. Maybe they could if everyone grouped together and fought against him. But even that was doubtful. He was the embodiment of a wolf. But now Taehwan had no other choice. If he let this go, Ji Young will definitely take the lead. Did Mu Young understand Taehwan's look? Mu Young suddenly moved towards the center of the stage. At the same time, the commotion died down and everyone's gaze fell on him. It was because he had never stepped out like this before. After gaining everyone's attention, he spoke. I am going to explore the outskirts of the temple. All volunteers will receive 2 loaves of bread and clean water every day. He's insane. That was the one thought in everyone's mind. Why would all these people try to stay in this small temple? Because if they went even a little bit outside the temple, they would be overwhelmed with monsters. And he was going to explore that place? It didn't make the situation better now that he was handing out bread and water. Going out there would be no different than suicide. They couldn't decipher any other meaning besides going out to die. But Mu Young continued to wait arrogantly. It was like it didn't matter if anyone joined him or not. No one would volunteer. That's what most people thought. Mister, can't it be 3 loaves of bread? For me and my father. The first to appear was a little girl. She looked like she was 9 years old. She still had a lot of baby fat on her. On the other hand, her father was an armless cripple. He had lost both his arms during the monster attack on the 2nd day. Death seemed certain for them as soon as they leave the temple. They wouldn't be of any help either. It would be considered good if they didn't hold him back. Welcome. But Muyang's next words shattered everyone's expectations. If you left them alone, they were going to die anyways. It made no sense in accepting those two. However, Muyang interpreted the situation differently. Quite fierce. The young girl knew by instinct that following Muyang was her only way to survive. She had quick wits and was a fast decision maker. Age was not a problem. No one here could match up to his standards anyways. If that was the case, it would be better to choose someone fast-witted. Anyone else? What do you mean by explore the surroundings? A man who didn't belong to either side asked. Muyang calmly replied, for 3 to 4 hours every day, you will explore the surroundings and gather anything essential. You will hunt if necessary. What they could earn at the temple was extremely limited. To earn something, you must be willing to accept the risks that follow. The more risks you take, the more profits you could gain. There was nothing you can get for free, at least in the underworld. I will volunteer as well. Surprisingly, Taehwan made his move. It was quite unexpected as Muyang thought he would continue his rivalry with Ju-young. Are you sure? We're not going out to play, he replied sarcastically. To him, seeing the two sides fighting each other was no different than bantering children. Taehwan nodded his head. I know it's a job with my life on the line. I also thought it was about time to explore the surrounding areas. It's not safe to continue to stay in this place we know nothing about. He thought of others before himself before he made his decision. His kind normally didn't last long. Nosy people like Taehwan were usually the first to die. But if he survives, he will grow to become a great influence. The Dragon Lord was like that. Everyone acknowledged that he had the talent of a real soldier. If he didn't die by Muyang's hands, he would have made a great difference. However, it was very rare to find someone like the Dragon Lord. Even if they did survive, in the abyss like the underworld, 99% of them will eventually have a changed personality. Muyang was skeptical that Taehwan would survive. Things that can be obtained outside the temple. The reason why Muyang was gathering people was simple. The rewards he could obtain outside were greater than what he could earn here. Moving luggage, searching and even sleeping, these were better done in a group than by himself. Also, it was better to hunt for monsters outside than killing them during the raids. Primarily, people raise their skills better when they strive for it. By fighting monsters at the temple, their skills will rise quickly in the beginning, but it will slowly stagnate. If you didn't constantly improve your abilities, you wouldn't be able to survive the harsh realities of the underworld. It was a struggle to stay alive. But for now, it was more important to find the magical items hidden outside the temple. A magical item with movement abilities and a storage-type talisman, Hellhound's Dagger, Despair Scout's Gloves and the Mask of Arrogance. I'll find as many as I can. Although Muyang lost many important things by going back to the past, he was able to keep his knowledge and experience. After killing each of his thousands of targets, he would always read and memorize their history. There were many objects to find outside the temple. It was time to get started. In total, 5 people volunteered. Muyang gave each of them a torch. The ends of the torches were smeared with oil. The oil was made by boiling the carcasses of the monsters. Never lose the torches and the oil can, unless you want to end up as monster fodder. Unlike the modern world with bright neon lights everywhere to brighten up even the darkest nights, here they could only rely on the torches to see. Most monsters fear fire. At the very least, going around with a torch meant that they would be less likely to be ambushed. A man who received a torch asked, "Aren't we just looking around for 3 to 4 hours?" It was currently early morning. If they were to explore for 3 to 4 hours, the sun would be at its highest. It seemed like he felt uncomfortable with the preparations for the night. But Muyang said with a firm voice, "We don't know what kind of situation we will come across. Also, every midnight the surrounding topography will change, and if we don't have the torches, then we won't be able to find our way out." "What do you mean our surroundings change?" This time it was Taehwan who asked. Of course they didn't know. Muyang decided to use their misunderstanding to his advantage. "Like you all thought, I am someone who has been living here for a while." So that rumor was true. When everyone was confused, Muyang acted as if he knew what was going to happen. This was why people assumed that he arrived here before them and had lived at the temple for a while. He told them, "Outside the temple is wilderness itself. We won't have the time to help those who fall behind." And then, as if he was looking to see their resolve, he examined each of them. He especially carefully examined the young girl, Bei Suzy, and her crippled father for a long time. Having quick wits was more helpful than others with ambiguous skills, but there was the question of them being able to keep up in the harsh conditions. As she obviously knew what he meant, Suzy gritted her teeth and said, "I'll do my best. So I won't be a burden to anyone." After all, there were no other options for her if she wanted to survive. If she was to lose the chance at being by Mu-young's side, there wouldn't be anyone else who would take care of the father-daughter pair. She made up her mind that even if she was to die, she wanted to at least attempt to live. She has quite the backbone for her age. It seemed like she always had a sense of responsibility. Along with her fast wits and decisive decisions, it was surprising to see her adapt so fast for her age. That was why it was a little unfortunate. If she was a bit older, with a little help, she would have been able to rise to considerable heights. However, the underworld was not a place that a young girl could easily survive on her own. Even I don't have the time to take care of others. It was a bit unfortunate, but that was it. After examining each and every one of them, he turned his back. If you don't want to die, don't argue with my orders. Don't get curious. Follow me unconditionally. Understand? Everyone solemnly nodded their heads. There was nothing more important than words from an expert. Especially after seeing what Mu-young was capable of, at least in the survival aspect, he was a pro. Then let's head out. After preparing their weapons and packing some tools, the torch and the oil can, they started to move. Sith. Crunch. Mu-young stomped on a huge ant that was targeting his feet. As the fist-sized ant exploded, its juices flew everywhere. Dark red fighter ant. It was a big ant that produced neurotoxins. If someone was to get bitten, the bite will swell up to multiple times its size and the area would become paralyzed. Crush each one you see. He gave out a warning. Although they weren't life-threatening, if they couldn't move, they would eventually die. Gulp. 6 people, including Mu-young, cautiously stepped into the forest. They were constantly on high alert and paid sharp attention to their surroundings. They are already like that. It was good that they were alert, but if they tried to keep it up for hours, they would be mentally and physically exhausted. Even if Mu-young told them that, they wouldn't listen. It was because this place was a total mystery to them. It was faster for them to learn from their experiences. "Mister, there's an item here." Suzy brought a magical item to him. She found it after crushing a few dark red fighter ants. Paralysis-inducing magical item. It contained the neurotoxin produced by the dark red fighter ants. In a slightly more refined form. Mu-young grabbed the magical item with one hand and told everyone, "After killing monsters outside the temple, there will occasionally be items like these. For those that wish to use the item can do so by holding the item with their hands." He brought out the water-producing magical item, and once he held it in his other hand, water began to slowly trickle out. This is water, but the other one contains neurotoxins. It could affect your body, so be careful when handling it. Afterwards, Mu-young handed the magical item back to Suzy. Suzy tilted her head slightly. "I can keep it?" "Of course. You're the one who found it, therefore it's yours." He drew a clear line. Everyone had to be responsible for their own items that they find. After walking for a bit, Mu-young pointed towards a tree. "If you look carefully, you will find trees with exceptionally green and round leaves. All the things growing from this tree are beneficial. However, you must look carefully as there are similar-looking trees that are poisonous." He took a couple of the mushrooms growing on the tree and placed it in his storage bag. It was a white moss-like mushroom that helped with blood circulation. Taehwan spoke. "Can we grab them?" "Store as much as you can." It was a rare tree found in this forest known as the sacred tree. "We were lucky. It was uncertain if they will see this tree again. They had to take as many as they could while they had the chance." "Look, Dad, it's a mushroom. I think it will be delicious if we grill it. I'll cook it into something tasty for you." Suzy excitedly stored lots of mushrooms in her bag. Footsteps. As others hurried to grab the mushrooms, Mu-young had already finished gathering and looked for any traces around the tree with his hands. He then found a scratch made by an animal with 3 claws. It must be the territory of the 3-clawed shrew mouse. The topography changed every midnight. If they had simply remembered the places they have been, they would be screwed. So it was necessary to check whose territory they were in. Also, because the 3-clawed shrew mice moved in groups, they were quite hard to deal with. Even though they were only about knee-high, they had sharp teeth and were very fast. If I remember correctly, there should be a high-grade storage-type magical item in their territory. Storage-type magical items were very important. Depending on their grade, a number of items one could store varied. If people didn't store their belongings in a storage-type magical item, they could easily be targeted by others. Of course, the shrew mice didn't just live in a single territory. They lived in a few different areas, so he couldn't be sure if he would find it here, but it was still worth a try. This might be a bit annoying. Muyang knitted his brow after seeing all the traces nearby. By the looks of it, it seemed like there weren't just a few tens or a few hundreds even. He estimated that there were at least 3,000 of these shrew mice living in this territory. It was best to quickly accomplish his goals and leave. If you're all done gathering, we should start moving. Muyang told them to hurry up. Get the fuck away. Fuck off. Two men who fell behind were swinging their swords and screaming out loud. A brief moment of inattentiveness led them to be surrounded by shrew mice. TSK. Muyang clicked his tongue. If it was him in the past, he would have noticed these things in an instant. Unfortunately, it was impossible in his current state. Maybe it was for the best. He couldn't avoid it. Therefore, it was better to use it as an advantage. Especially when some stats increase more rapidly in these type of situations. If he looked at it simply as a way to temper his body, it was actually more beneficial. Muyang raised his scimitar. Bring it on. He shouted loudly to get their attention. It was a dangerous move, but he thought that if he fought with all he had, it wasn't impossible to win. Screech. Screech. One of the shrew mice fell down from above. While falling, the mice raised its claws in an attempt to cut Muyang's neck. Starting by leaving an air hole in the belly of the mouse, Muyang started to kill mercilessly. A number a bit less than 150. He had to take out one mouse per strike. Muyang started to collect all the magical items that poured out as he killed the shrew mice one by one. Name: Shrew Mouse's Strike. Rank: Classification: Single Use. Effect: for one time only you can have the same effect as a shrew mouse's scratch. It was just an F rank. It was the lowest rank with barely any effect. On average, one dropped for every 2 shrew mice he killed. The reason why he made an effort to even collect these magical items while killing the shrew mouse was because they stacked up. If you looked at the item individually, they were useless. However, if you collected 5, then it was a different story. The name changed as well as their rank. Spell Enchantment. In the underworld, people referred it as spell enchantment. By collecting 5 of the same magical item, it allowed the item to evolve into an item with a much stronger effect, or sometimes an item with much different effect. Not yet. However, it wasn't an item he was pleased with. Screech. He couldn't afford to waste any more time in this situation. His shirt was torn near his belly button by a shrew mouse and his skin showed through. Blood dripped from the red streaks that appeared all over his body. However, he didn't care. Muyang was used to these life-threatening battles. He pushed himself further. Even though he was able to dodge all their attacks easily, he waited for their attacks and counterattacked only when they were very close to him. If you endure these dangers, your agility will increase. Agility stats didn't just increase your ability to move faster. It was considered the third eye. The commonly known sixth sense was a part of agility. To increase his agility stat, he had to put more pressure on himself in these situations. Creak. Screech. The shrew mouse started to focus on Muyang and gathered towards him. They recognized that Muyang was the most dangerous one out of them. Muyang kicked their carcasses in order to create a makeshift barrier. Being vulnerable all around was the worst. He needed to at least keep a side block to stop them from coming at him on all sides. He slashed his scimitar without even turning around. Gulp. The mouse that tried to bite down with his wide mouth had the scimitar pierced through his neck. Slash. As he pulled out his scimitar, blood scattered everywhere. Muyang was getting exhausted. However, Muyang didn't stop. He moved faster and fiercer when more and more shrew mice gathered around him. Even though he was smothered in blood and had plenty of wounds, Muyang's movements were still the same. His instincts took over the body as he lost half his sense of reason. And so, he was able to kill more than 70 shrew mice. Weirong. A small sound emitted from the magical item. At the same time, the shrew mouse who heard this sound became sluggish. There we go. The corners of his mouth lifted to form a sly smile. It was as he expected. When the magical item evolved, it became the shrew mouse's cry. Information popped up as he lightly examined the magical item. Name: Shrewmouse's cry. Rank: V. Classification: continuous. Effect: inflicts surrounding shrewmice with a fear status. Although it could not be used to physically damage their enemies, it was much more useful. Just possessing this magical item would affect the shrewmice near him. Because of the fear status, the shrewmice's movements became sluggish. Unlike before, they weren't able to act as a group and were scattered. When the shrewmice flinched, Muyang started the massacre. Incredible. Taehwan was absent-mindedly staring at the scene which was unfolding before his eyes. Out of all the members gathered today, Muyang was the only one who was truly hunting. It was a scene that made others tremble. Muyang looked like an evil spirit. He seemed like a champion fighting to death. Every unyielding step seemed to thirst for victory. If it wasn't for Muyang, they would have been annihilated in seconds. I have to get stronger. Overwhelmingly. That is what Taehwan felt as he watched Muyang fight. If he doesn't get stronger, he would never be able to survive in this place. If he wanted to survive, he had to get stronger. Like the man in front of him, he had to persistently strive to survive. After we clean up, we will move out, said Muyang after he had massacred all the shrewmice except for the few that had fled. His body was caked with a mixture of his own blood and the blood of the shrewmice. There should be a den nearby. Looking towards the direction the shrewmice fled to, it seemed like their destination wasn't far away. His stamina was almost completely used up, but he couldn't stop. There was no guarantee that it would still be there tomorrow. We aren't going back? There were no casualties on their side, but everyone had some light scratches. They were also extremely exhausted. It was too much to expect them to continue. Swish. Instead of answering, Muyang opened his gathering bag and took out a few leaves. The leaves on the sacred tree could disinfect wounds and had excellent treatment capabilities. After inattentively crushing the leaves into a paste, he rubbed it on his wounds. Not long after, the bleeding stopped. Those that want to leave, leave. If you leave now, you can get back by retracing our steps. Muyang was completely calm. The reason why he dragged all these people out here was simple. Luggage, sleep, and for unlikely circumstances. It was also to select the few who would fight with their life on the line. Something like exploring the outskirts of the temple could only be done by those who were desperate. For the boss battle, I need people with at least a bit of experience. Bosses were strong. It was hard for him to overwhelm them alone. The ones that only improved inside the temple weren't of any use. Only those who experienced the outskirts of the temple for a few days would be able to cope with the boss. It was foolish for him to try to force them. That was why he only accepted the people who volunteered. At the same time, the person who asked the question became dumbfounded. Even if they tried to return to the temple, if they were attacked by monsters along the way without Muyang, they would be in danger either way. In fact, they felt that they would be safer with Muyang after watching the previous scene. I will follow you. The first one to speak was Taehwan. Muyang, who was examining his wounds next to a tree, looked at him. We're not going out to play. I didn't volunteer so I could fool around. Muyang got up. I guess he figured something out. He wasn't simply a meddlesome fellow. On the other hand, Suzy held a small dagger in her hand. Looking at the blood stained on the dagger, it seemed like she didn't simply run away when they encountered the shrewmice. She probably wielded her dagger to protect her father. Even so, she was only out of breath. He didn't see any apparent signs of agitation in her. If she just survives. He smacked his lips in anticipation for a second before shaking his head. He then grasped his trembling fist. He couldn't calm his excitement. It was quite different from his past self, who was cool-headed in any situation. He didn't even feel this excited after killing 300 assassins and the leader of the Forest of Death. Was it because his body reverted back to its untrained state? As expected, my agility went up. After the fight, his agility went up by 1. The more he pushed himself towards the boundary between life and death, the faster his attributes would rise. He looked at the carcasses of the shrewmice around him. The smell of shrewmouse blood was pungent. This was not a good place to stay. Even if it was the territory of the three-clawed shrewmice, this much blood could attract other predators. If, in the unlikely chance, a giant Leo appeared, he would have no choice but to use the others as bait and escape. Crush these herbs and rub them on your wounds. We leave in 5 minutes. He took out some herbs from his storage bag and distributed a small portion to everyone. After following several leads, they arrived at the shrewmice den. was a huge cave. Clomp. The sound of their footsteps echoed out. There was no way to figure out how deep the cave was. Raise your torches and step lightly. I will lead. Taehwan, you bring up the back. Wouldn't it be better if I was at the front? Don't question my orders. Okay. Before they left the temple, Muyang told everyone to follow his orders unconditionally. No matter what, they had to return by midnight. There was no time for him to explain each and every detail. After arranging everyone in a line, he headed into the cave. Fweek, fweek. Not long after, they were able to hear the cries of the shrew mice. Muyang took out the shrew mouse's cry. The rushing shrew mice slowed down and paced back and forth hesitantly. When he shed the torchlight around him, they were able to see approximately 300 shrew mice scattered around every corner. In any case, he wasn't after the shrew mice, he was after what was behind them. It was wise to pass through the horde of mice while they were still under the fear status. Gasp. Everyone was frothing at their mouth as they rushed to follow Muyang. He wasn't running at an especially fast pace, but the pressure felt from the surrounding monsters was no joke. They ran for a while. As the pathway slowly expanded, they arrived at an enormous cavern. From the floor to the ceiling, it seemed to be 50 meters tall, and there was a multitude of holes on the walls. These are the tunnels the shrew mice used to move around. This was the center where all the tunnels led to. A shrine. Taehwan softly spoke out. His eyes fell on a certain place. At the end of the cavern there was a shrine. There was a hexagram drawn in the center, and statues of a goddess were spread out around it. Although it looked old and rusted, everyone was captivated by its magnificence. A hexagram and statues of a goddess, huh? Muyang looked at the status viewer on his left wrist. There was a pentagram on its face. On the other hand, the symbol drawn in the center of the shrine was a hexagram. Looked like two overlapping triangles. However, Muyang had definitely seen the symbol and the statue before. The Star of David. What? Taehwan tilted his head as he looked towards Muyang. But Muyang's expression was extremely solemn. Why would the Star of David be here? His whole body was shaking. The Star of David. The symbol only appeared in places where the 72 demon gods were summoned into the underworld after being unsealed from Lemegeton. That meant that one of the 72 demon gods was summoned here, and that the shrine was just a consequence of the summoning. And that statue of the goddess was Gremory. As one of the 72 demon gods, Gremory held the 56th seat. It was the statue of Gremory. What do I do? Muyang motionlessly stared at the shrine. A place where the Star of David appeared. There would be treasures in every place demon gods were summoned. For example, in the place where the 7th seat, Amon, was summoned, there was a book. The book overflowed with knowledge of all kinds of magic. Magicians who have read the Book of Amon gain 10 years' worth of training from simply reading the book. Those who rigorously studied the book became grand magicians. The owner of the book's class was changed to the secret class, Archmage, and constructed the Tower of Wisdom, which allowed him to confidently place in the top 10 among humans. Unfortunately, no one could ever find the summoning location of Gremory. He couldn't understand why Gremory was summoned so close to the Blue Temple where beginners stayed. Of course, he expected that this place would be as risky as the retrieval the Book of Amon, where more than 500 people lost their lives. There is only one chance. If he failed, that was it. After a month, the gate will open and they will all be sent to the underworld. Once they arrived in the underworld, they will not be able to return to the temple. Also, there was no guarantee that they would be able to come back to the shrine within a month. He was at a crossroad. If they were successful in investigating the shrine, Muyang will have an unbelievable advantage over others. On the other hand, if he failed, he will die. We will go inside. He made his decision. The underworld was a place where nothing could be gained without risk. The rewards were too tempting to just let this opportunity pass by. Rumble. As soon as they stepped into the shrine, the ground below them shook and words appeared in front of their eyes. 4 doors appeared at the time. A few words were etched on each door. And, what's this all of a sudden? I think it's telling us to choose a door and enter? 2 members of the party discussed as they examined the 4 doors. You can only choose once. 4 doors. Only one person could enter a room, and these kinds of trials could not be repeated. Once someone enters a room, the door will lose its effect. It was also impossible for one to pass a trial and attempt another. Until this time, no one has ever reached the shrine, so the 4 trials were still intact. Myung rubbed his chin. The trials are chosen by the specific characteristics of each of the 72 demon gods. There were always treasures to be found in places where the Star of David appears. However, the methods of attaining these treasures were different. The method would usually depend on the specific characteristics of the demon god. The trial to obtain the Book of Ammon was a conflict between human malice and selfishness. In the end, there were more than 500 casualties as people ended up killing each other. On the other hand, what about Gremory? Gremory never revealed herself even until the very end. There were only rumors that she was the only female demon goddess. Besides that, there was no other information. Even after the great calamity when the demon gods were destroying mankind, she never showed herself. There were a few demon gods who never showed up either, but even among them, Gremory was especially hidden under a veil. He would have no choice but to make a decision depending on the commonly known characteristics of Gremory: fidelity, honesty, generosity, and anguish. The first things that come to mind were those four. There were a few characteristics included that didn't match with the typical image of demon gods, but since he had never seen Gremory, there was nothing he could do. Anyhow, these were the characteristics used to describe Gremory in literature. He had to assume that the trials had something to do with them. Will there be rewards in every trial or after the completion of all four trials, or if not those, will the reward be hidden in just a single trial? There was no way to know right now. Somehow I feel uneasy. I'm not going in. Eventually, a man raised a white flag. Whoa. The sounds and the aura emitted from the doors were without a doubt able to stimulate fear in humans. Unless you were quite courageous, you wouldn't even think about opening a door. Since Myung was used to these situations, he wasn't heavily affected, but to those whose lives were the most precious to them, it was an obvious choice. "Mister, can I go in there?" Suzy broke the brief silence. Myung looked at her indifferently. How unexpected. She was the youngest and physically the weakest. She was only able to survive because of her quick wits and decisiveness. Since she was with her father, he didn't expect her to take risks, but she was the first to affirm she would be challenging one of the doors. The door she chose was. No one knows what's waiting for you inside the door. Is there a reason why you chose this door? Just. I don't know. I just think that I should enter that door. She bowed her head deeply. It looked like she didn't know how to explain herself. A feeling. Or a trap. It was hard to conclude the reason why only Suzy felt that way. But it felt like it wasn't just a fluke. It's not a trap. If it was, there was no way they would target Suzy. It is natural they would try to separate the most powerful one here, Myung. Even if they targeted Suzy, it wasn't like she would influence others. He recalled Suzy's past actions. As he thought about it, he realized that, although she wouldn't always be doing the best thing to survive, she would at least take the next best action. Like the time she survived the attack of the three-clawed shrew mice. The others would try their best to close their distance between Myung, but only she would keep her distance and secretly look for a place to avoid the fight. She wasn't taking actions consciously, her instincts and senses took over. "Which door do you think I will have to enter?" So he asked. No matter how hard he thought, there was no definite answer. On the other hand, Suzy acted with confidence. The more surprising fact was her father's reaction. Normally parents would try to stop their children from getting in danger. Yet, as if it was natural, he didn't even try to stop her. Most likely he knew about her feeling. As she looked back and forth between the four doors and Myung, she pointed at a door. "This one." Myung followed her finger and looked towards the door. The difficult and long path. He shook his head. He then stood in front of the door with the phrase, "All of you enter the door Suzy chooses for you." What? Taehwan stared at him in surprise as if inquiring what he meant. It was abnormal to let a child make a choice that could decide their fate. However, Myung thought it was the right choice. Although he could only explain it as a feeling, since he had experienced life in the underworld, he able to accept it rather easily. It wasn't like there was no one with foresight in the underworld. "Suzy, who are the people who will attempt the remaining two doors?" Taehwan Appa and that person. She didn't hesitate as she picked out those two people. And so it was decided that Taehwan was to attempt the while the other man was to attempt the. Then are you telling me to stay out here with this person? The man who was the first to say that he wouldn't enter the trials trembled. It was because if he was to stay with the armless cripple, there was no doubt they would die if the monsters attacked. As long as you're in the shrine, the shrew mice won't attack. It wasn't a place where beasts like shrew mice could enter whenever they wanted. And there really were no traces of shrew mice around the shrine. We have to finish as fast as possible. It will be midnight in 9 hours. They need at least 1 hour to return back to the temple. If they weren't able to get out of the trials by then the topography of the forest will change. If that happens, it will become much harder to return to the temple. Then, let's see each other on the other side. Myung was the first to open the door. The inside of the room was pitch black like a black hole. Slam. As soon as he stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind him. He looked around his surroundings. An endlessly desolate desert. There was absolutely nothing in this place. My bag and magical items disappeared. On top of that, his food and water were gone as well. Thin clothes and a scimitar were all he had. It seemed like the items unnecessary for the trial were removed. If I keep walking, I guess something will pop up. Didn't the name already suggest it would be a difficult and long path? There was no way that as soon as he stepped into the room he would see his objective. He pushed through the rough sand and walked forward. How long had he been walking? It felt like it had been at least a day. If it was him in the past, he would have been fine after walking continuously without rest for a week. However, in his current state he was slowly approaching his limit. The lack of food and water was the problem. It was incredibly taxing to walk without rest towards an unknown destination. If it was any normal person, they would have already exhausted their mind and body. However, Myung wasn't normal. I can still endure a bit longer. He dragged his feet. After walking like that for a few hours, he came across an oasis. Poison. But the water in the oasis gave off a purple hue. He sniffed the water and dipped his tongue in the water. Spit. He spat out the water immediately and turned his body away. Poison was mixed in. It wasn't a strong poison, but if he was to drink it, it would only momentarily relieve his thirst. It wasn't wise to try to distill the water without the proper tools either. The fourth day. The next thing to appear was a rabbit. He tried to hunt down the rabbit, but the rabbit was always slightly faster than him. So close yet so far. The distance between the two wouldn't shrink no matter what he tried. So it's like this. After walking for 4 days, a man who has lost all sense of reason will do whatever it takes to catch the rabbit. But Myung realized that it was a trick. He gave up on the rabbit and forced his feet to move. He walked a few more hours like that. Thump. Even the great Myung had eventually collapsed on the floor. I can't fall here. The mind controlled the body. Myung was successful in getting his body back up with extreme concentration. Compared to the beginning, his pace was very slow, but he didn't give up and continued to walk. To make up for his loss of energy, his body started to burn away his muscles. This was the most optimal choice his body could make in this situation where there wasn't even water to drink. Not long after, his body was only skin and bones and his hair started falling out quite quickly. It was because he was Myung he was able to stay alive in that state and continue walking. For 40 years, there was not a single moment when he lived his own life. He wanted to live his own life. A life of some significance. However, that was impossible. But then he was given a chance. There was no way he was going to waste this chance as soon as he got it. Even though there were tens, even hundreds of times he could have given up, he didn't. Along the way, food and water did appear. But since he knew that the trial was simply tempting him, he didn't even bother to look at them. As his stamina and mentality reached their limits, someone blocked his path. Why did you destroy the forest of death? Didn't we have a good relationship the past 40 years? Was it a mirage? The man in front of him was the owner of the forest of death, the chief. Myung waved his hands, however, the chief didn't disappear. It wasn't my life. Didn't you kill all your companions that have been with you for years? The ones who you laughed and played with. We never laughed. Myung took out the scimitar from his chest. Just wait. This time I will certainly erase you. Once he returns to the underworld, his first target will be the forest of death. It would be difficult to do this right away, but he will strengthen himself and annihilate them as fast as possible. Fush. As he slashed out with his scimitar, the chief's blood sprayed out. Gulp. Myung drank the blood dripping off the chief. He bit into the chief's flesh. And then approximately 300 members of the Forest of Death appeared. Vectors. Their eyes were blank. It looked as if they were asking why he killed them and to take responsibility for their deaths. However, Myung looked at the sight and laughed brightly. I don't regret my decision. He used the last of his strength and performed a deadly sword dance. A door appeared. As Muyang stepped through the door, a bright light enveloped him. Muyang closed his eyes. When he opened them, he noticed others looking at him. Altogether 5 people. Was I the last one? The desert was long. 4 days, maybe weeks. Muyang had walked continuously. No way, did they wait for me all this time? Muyang stretched his hands and touched his hair. His body of only skin and bones with almost no hair had been turned back to normal. An illusion. Muyang realized that the world within the door was an illusion. Within the doors he wasn't aware of it, but he became certain once he passed through the door. Are you okay? Taehwan approached him. He donned a shield Muyang hadn't seen before. A red shield embedded with a cylindrical ruby. As the aura seemed to be out of the ordinary, Muyang assumed it was the reward he earned from passing through his trial. As Muyang's gaze fixed on the shield, Taehwan awkwardly laughed. Ah, this shield? They gave it to me when I passed through the trial. It's a rank B item, the Shield of Eradication. AB rank gear was definitely a rare item in the underworld. Even in a large guild, it was only given out to a few of their important members. It wasn't an item a newbie could get. Taehwan seemed quite triumphant about the fact that he earned AB rank equipment. Hyangnam. 1. There is an unknown effect on this shield. Could you please look at it? Taehwan started to call Muyang Hyangnam, since they entered the forest. And so he held out the shield. Normally it was common sense to not hand over your gear even among your friends. It meant that he wasn't completely contaminated by this world. But as Muyang was also curious, he took Taehwan's shield. Name, Shield of Eradication. Rank, B. Classification, A. Keepable type. Durability, 8,500. Effect, you gain a toughness buff when you face more enemies. You got a quite decent item. Muyang nodded his head. The durability level was certainly high, but his attention was more focused on the toughness. Within the B rank items, it was definitely hard to find one with a toughness effect. On top of that, its buff will increase as he faced more opponent. If he used it on a battlefield, it was sufficient enough to be qualified as a B+ or an A rank item. However, Muyang's reaction only made Taehwan more puzzled. I don't understand what toughness really means. It is a buff to reduce the effects of spells and curses. It also allows you to resist primitive states of dread like fear. Muyang handed back the shield. It was a decent item, but Taehwan's abilities were far off from being able to use it to its full potential. There was a secret class, Guardian of Light, which used shields, but unfortunately Muyang didn't know how to earn it. As Taehwan received his shield back, he said, "Anyhow, it seems like you have also changed quite drastically." Taehwan skimmed Muyang's body and looked at his sheath attached to his waist. The usual place for his scimitar of strength was replaced by a different sword. Muyang drew his sword. It was a red sword that looked like it was covered in blood. Bone-like objects stuck out throughout the length of the blade. Name, Anguish. Rank A. Classification, A. Keepable type. Durability, 30,000 unrepairable. Effect, Strength +5. Ability to steal blood from the opponent and recover the stamina of the user. It was a high-ranked equipment that only the leaders of guilds would normally use. The effects were also outstanding. It was perfect for Muyang, who had a low level of stamina. The fact that it was not reparable was a bit of a fallback, but still, since the durability itself was amazingly high, he knew it would last him at least a few years. Even with his scimitar of strength with a durability of only 300, he was still able to use it even if it became a bit dull. The Shield of Eradication is nothing compared to it. There was a condition attached to the Shield of Eradication. As you fight a greater number of enemies. If you think in reverse, it also implies that you can't get the toughness effect when you fight against a few people. However, with Anguish he just needed to attack. As long as he could spill the blood of his enemies and the durability had not dropped to 0, it was built for continuous fighting. But Anguish wasn't the only thing he had earned. Muyang turned his status viewer and checked his abilities. Achievement effect dashed Gremre's Anguish, A, +3 to all abilities. Class effect dash none. Strength 30, 22 + 8. Agility 23, 20 + 3. Stamina 24, 21 + 3. Intelligence 14, 11 + 3. Wisdom 15, 12 + 3. Fighting Aura 13, 10 + 3. Special note. Fighting Aura has been awakened. Asterisk as your fighting aura increases, low-grade enemies won't be able to approach you. Before and after comparison. Strength 11, Agility 13, Stamina 9, Intelligence 9, Wisdom 8. Strength 30, Agility 23, Stamina 24, Intelligence 14, Wisdom 15. Maybe that was why his body felt like it was overflowing with power. Even Muyang himself was surprised at his development. When comparing to the first day, his basic stats had improved drastically. However, with the inclusion of Anguish and the achievement effect, his stats had improved even further. Besides, an A-ranked achievement effect was much rarer than similarly ranked weapons. That was because receiving an achievement effect itself was extremely difficult. With this, it seems like the boss battle will be much easier. His current stats exceeded far beyond his expectations. If Taehwan blocked the attacks with his shield, he thought that it was enough to come out victorious in the boss battle. Afterwards, it seemed possible for him to go and retrieve his secret class. Anyways, he examined everything except for the last one. The Demon King of the 27th Legion? If Muyang's memories were correct, he clearly remembered the last message about a skill earned with that name. It was exceptionally rare for someone to gain a skill before earning a class, but the name wasn't anything ordinary either. When he opened his skill category, there was one as he expected. Skill title: The Demon King of the 27th Legion, A+. Description: the qualifications to become the Demon King of the 27th Legion. Gremory originally had 26 legions. Only Demon Kings were able to command the 26 legions, and every one of them possessed tremendous power. The first human Demon King had been recorded in your history. These were the messages that popped up as he checked his skill. Muyang knitted his brows after reading all the messages. If you really think about it, it's not really a skill. Simply put, he didn't have the qualification. But the necessary qualification was a staggering A+ rank. However, if he could prove himself, it meant that he would gain more power than he could imagine. A quest to become Demon Goddess Gremory's Demon King. Even in the past, Gremory was a demon goddess who didn't reveal herself and was a demon goddess veiled in mystery. He never thought it was because she was a peacekeeper. He thought for a moment and decided it wasn't a bad idea. If he could gain strength and achieve his goals, becoming a Demon King wasn't bad at all. What Muyang truly wanted to do was save humanity. But it didn't mean that he wanted to save everyone. That's why Muyang didn't want to be a true warrior. It suited him more to become a Demon King-like warrior. The problem was the method. How he was going to become one. For Muyang, who didn't even know the location of Gremory, it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Someday I will achieve this. However, Muyang didn't really care. They were most likely able to find this shrine of Gremory only because someone or something deliberately led them to it. Otherwise, it would have been impossible. That meant that it was possible to complete the quest. Mister. It says that I gained a new class. Susie carefully approached him. She then removed her status viewer from her wrist. This was also considered taboo in the underworld. However, this wasn't even comparable to Taehwan giving his shield to him. Don't ever show your status viewer to others. Okay. She sunk her head from Muyang's cold words. But quickly raised her head to say, then I will only show it to you, mister. After all, if I don't know what I have, I will still be in danger. Muyang looked at Susie's eyes for a moment. He couldn't believe that that was a statement made by a 9-year-old. She really was a keen child. And it wasn't as if her words were wrong. Not knowing what you had was also dangerous. He took Susie's status viewer and looked at it closely. Base Achievement effect - none. Class effect - Valkyrie of Dawn. Secret, there will be light after hardships. Strength 11, Agility 11. Stamina 11, Intelligence 11, Wisdom 11. Special note: none. So you could even receive a secret class. Valkyries referred to maiden warriors who served a god. It seemed like a special class only women could receive. Even in the past, he had never heard of the Valkyrie of Dawn. That was probably why it was a secret class. In the past, there were less than 100 people who had a secret class. Just by looking at that, you could tell that they were well worth it. It was as if Susie received an incredible growth potential. Though there was a question regarding the last part. There will be light after hardships. It was indeed an ambiguous effect. Does it mean that you will only get stronger as you face more hardships? Perhaps it might have something to do with the fact that her abilities are all 11. Thump, 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 screech, thweek. That moment. It became noisy outside. Must be the shrew mice. Muyang sensed a huge number of them heading their way. Isn't this the sound of the monsters coming towards us? They shouldn't be able to enter the shrine, right? The two cowardly men asked Muyang. However, Muyang just shook his head. All the doors disappeared and the Star of David had lost its brightness. Bang! Swish! The statues of the goddess outside the shrine started to crack and crumble. These signs only meant one thing. Catch this. And brace yourselves. After passing Susie her status viewer, Muyang unsheathed anguish. Enemies are approaching. A large cavern. Shrew mice swarmed out from a great number of holes. There seemed to be easily over 2,000. Block the entrance. We can win if we fight them within a small pathway. Luckily the shrine would not collapse. So there was hope if they fought them at the entrance of the shrine. No matter how many there was a limit to how many could possibly come in through the entrance. First, Muyang held the magical item, Shrew Mouse's Cry. However, it had no effect on the shrew mice's movements. Something is controlling the shrew mice. That meant there was something that could control this swarm of shrew mice. And that its influence was greater than AD rank magical item, so the shrew mice could ignore the shrew mouse's cry. It would have been a close call without anguish. Muyang placed his magical item back in his bag. He then raised the edge of anguish to slice the neck of the oncoming shrew mouse. At the same time, anguish sucked in its blood. It converted the blood into stamina. As he regained his energy, he was overflowing with power. At the very least, it didn't seem like he was going to get exhausted and collapse. Keep the line. Arg. It seemed like Taehwan earned a shield, Suzy earned a secret class, and the remaining person earned 2 daggers. He just noticed the man swinging his 2 daggers wildly while screaming out loud. Wasn't his name Kong Baeksu? It seemed like he also passed the trials. Muyang didn't try to remember his name because he seemed like a scarred cat who was going to die sooner or later. But if he passed the trial, things changed. That meant that he had more than enough strength to be helpful for now. None of you will pass by me, you fucking mice be *cheese. Taehwan blocked the pathway the shrew mice were entering with his shield of eradication. He was the only person besides Muyang who wasn't afraid of them. The toughness buff from the shield of eradication allowed him to reduce his level of fear. Also, his toughness buff increased the more enemies he faced. Sword of Dawn. As Suzy quietly chanted, a sword of light appeared in her hand. It must be an inherent skill from the secret class, Valkyrie of Dawn. The skill wasn't very destructive, but it was enough to handle the shrew mice. Gush. Anguish pierced through a shrew mouse and completely devastated its organs. As soon as he pulled Anguish out, the shrew mouse's body exploded and its pieces flew everywhere. That wasn't all. While the others were stopping them at the entrance, he was the only one moving forward. The increased stats from passing the trial made him stronger. Although the difference wasn't drastic, he knew how to use his strength to its full potential. By instinctively calculating the air resistance, the angle of attack and even the slightest movement of his muscles, he was able to move without any wasteful actions. Compared to him, the shrew mice moved in very predictable patterns. Even though there were a lot of them, none could stop Muyang's advance. Those that saw Muyang's endless onslaught shuddered. In any case, he really is a madman. Taehwan, who was blocking the entrance using his toughness buff, and Baeksu, who was frantically swinging his daggers, were astonished. The brutally sliced shrew mice even looked pitiful. What if Muyang pointed his sword at them? Run away. Everyone thought the same thing. Running away. There was no other way. However, there was also the question of if they could even run away. Since people knew this, no one at the temple bothered him. However, he was much stronger now. Monster was the word that kept reoccurring in their mind. Where is it? As Muyang kept swinging his sword, he continuously scanned his surroundings. The thing that was controlling these shrew mice was probably not far away. While he continued, his magical item kept enchanting. Shrew Mouse's Cry D has now evolved to Shrew Mouse Slayer. Just because you blindly collected tons of magical items, didn't mean they would continue to rise in rank. There was always a limit. Items that start off as an F rank like the Shrew Mouse series tend to usually end at C rank. Of course, there were always transcendental evolution, but the materials and the effort that were required were unbelievable. For now it seemed like a pie in the sky. You were able to read the movements of the shrew mice. The magical item, Shrew Mouse Slayer, allowed Muyang to gain information about the shrew mice around him. Muyang instinctively realized that there was a total of 1,538 shrew mice in this cavern. At the same time, he found the location of the thing that controlled the shrew mice. It's there. Beyond the cavern. There laid the shrew mice king. Muyang made his way through without stopping. As the entrance was small, as long as Taehwan was there, it would be difficult for shrew mice to invade. That meant that it wasn't really necessary for Muyang to be there with them. Besides, it was a much wiser decision for him to eliminate the Great Shrew Mouse King and end the battle. Muyang headed towards the biggest hole among the thousands of holes in the cavern. Here. Just as he expected, as he entered the hole, there was an exceptionally large shrew mouse waiting for him. At least 2 m in height. He seemed to be about 5 times the size of a normal shrew mouse. When he noticed other large shrew mice around him, he was certain he had found their hideout. He must have sent signals from here to move the shrew mice. If you're a king, act like a king and come out. Roar. Like a lion, the Great Shrew Mouse King roared and swung his huge front claws. Swung. Anguish bounced off. Of course, it could have been that Muyang was weak, but the Great Shrew Mouse King's claws were also very sharp and sturdy. It seems like fighting with just my strength will get me nowhere. Even after a single exchange, he felt a shooting pain in his shoulders. If he was to receive a direct blow from him, his body wouldn't be able to handle it. Muyang changed his strategy. It couldn't be helped. Let's make this into a fight of endurance. What? Like? Anguish ate up the shrew mice around him. In an instant, Muyang was able to recover his stamina and went all out at the Great Shrew Mouse King again. If he was to lose his stamina again, he would attack the surrounding shrew mice. Roar. As he did this, the Great Shrew Mouse King's movements became more aggressive towards him. Are they blood-related? As this was the nest of the Great Shrew Mouse King, the shrew mice that were fighting outside didn't try to come in. Instead, there were a few shrew mice inside the nest. It seemed like they were the offspring of the king. The Great Shrew Mouse King desperately tried to stop Muyang, but Muyang continued to massacre them ruthlessly. You shouldn't be trying to attack me. Anguish kept absorbing all the blood it could get its hands on. A battle to the death where only one could live. Even the smallest forms of mercy would lead to a tragedy. As Muyang knew this better than anyone else, he didn't hesitate. Screech. Anguish scraped the floor to produce a sound which confused the Great Shrew Mouse King. The Great Shrew Mouse King, who was more enraged than ever, threw caution to the wind and headed straight for Muyang. By doing this, the stomach of the Great Shrew Mouse King was in plain sight. Muyang instantly found his chance to stab Anguish through its body. Skreek. He gave a loud cry. However, even that didn't last very long. Thump. As Muyang moved aside as he pulled out Anguish, the Great Shrew Mouse King slumped down. Muyang then picked up the magical item which appeared above its corpse. As the two magical items overlapped, a light radiated and evolved. Emperor of Shrew Mice. Normally, if you continuously killed the same type of monster and also killed their king, you were able to receive a magical item with an absolute effect over their race. There were also rumors that the same method applied to demon gods and demon kings, but there was no way in knowing the truth. Either way, the shrew mice were quite common monsters in the underworld due to its peculiar ability to reproduce. That was why there were also quite a few people who earned magical items regarding them. Muyang knew what to expect from the new item. As Muyang gazed at the magical item, information appeared. Name: Emperor of Shrew Mice. Rank: B. Classification: Continuous use, developing type. Effect: You can summon the owner of all the shrew mice, the Emperor of Shrew Mice. Summon. As he called out the most simple command, a shrew mouse appeared as the face of the magical item jiggled. It was slightly bigger than the size of his fist. King Kinning. It was obvious for everyone that it was a baby. This must be why it was a developing type. Muyang held the Emperor by its neck. As he came out of their hideout, all the shrew mice turned their heads around to look at them. Get lost. Freak. Right at that moment, a big commotion occurred. It was because they lost the influence of the Great Shrew Mouse King and noticed a much greater influence emitting from Muyang. As Muyang yelled at the shrew mice, they all fled into the cave. Huff. Are you okay? The 5 who were stopping the shrew mice in front of the temple ran towards him, and out of them Taehwan spoke. Muyang, who was completely expressionless, replied. We leave immediately. They had achieved everything they could. There was nothing good in staying here any longer. The forest was pitch black. Evening. However, it wasn't past midnight. A day had not passed yet. They followed the traces Muyang had left behind. If the topography didn't change, it seemed like they had enough time to return. When they arrived at the temple after roughly 2 hours of walking, everyone except Muyang was completely exhausted. Their bodies were glued to the ground. Dao gasp. Even you beat me to death, gasp. I don't think I could move. Pant, pant, pant. Most of them had facial expressions that showed breathing was the only thing they could do. Just a day. However, they experienced more than just that. Muyang noticed that just in a day their prayers have changed. As promised, I will give out the bread and water. Muyang distributed the bread and water to each of them. Even though they were completely exhausted, they all stuffed the bread in their throats. Take it. Thank you. Susie replied as she wiped off the sweat from her forehead. Even if it was only 3 pieces, she handled them with great care, as if she was handling some kind of treasure. As Muyang watched her, he quietly opened his mouth. You cannot tell anyone your class. Even to my father? Yes. The secret class was much rarer and worth more than a regular class. If people knew the truth when they entered the underworld, there will be bloodshed. Big guilds and clans would try to somehow get it or to kill if they couldn't earn it. Even if Susie was mature for her age, there was no way she could handle the harsh reality she might have to eventually to face. So until she had enough strength, even if it was her father, it was best to keep it a secret. I understand. Thank you for your advice. Bows. After she bowed 90 degrees toward Muyang, she ran towards her father. It's a nice momentum. To be honest, it was unexpected for everyone to return safely. Since people followed him much better than he expected, he was able to achieve what he wanted. At first he thought of them as simply a luggage carrier, but his impression of them was changing little by little. What? You guys came back. Look here. They came back. Although it was late at night, people started to quickly gather around them. Even the ones who were rubbing their sleepy eyes were awestruck as they realized that the group had returned. When they left the temple, not many expected them to come back alive. But without an exception, everyone had returned back safely. In an instant they were overcrowded. You look terrible. Which kind of monsters did you fight? Did you get anything? How did you find your way back? There was no one who wasn't curious about their trip outside the temple. Just one. Expect Jiyoung. Fuck, why are you all making a big fuss about something as trivial as this? While swearing roughly, he approached them with a trashy demeanor. Suddenly, a silence enveloped the group. Jiyoung was one of the 3 strongest people in the group, and because of his particular attitude, many were afraid of him. Jiyoung approached Taehwan by passing by other people and spoke while grinding his teeth. 4 people died today, assholes. All because you guys just had to go out on your wonderful exploration. Once a day, monsters raided the temple. However, including Muyang, 6 people had left the temple. The remaining group had to try and fight off the monsters with their insufficient strength, and 4 people ended up being sacrificed. Excluding the first day, it was the highest number of casualties. Not having Muyang and Taehwan there must have made a big impact. Especially Muyang, as he was able to annihilate almost half of the monsters by himself. His absence must have left a huge impact. However, losing just 4 people meant that they fought well. A moment later, Jiyoung raised his left hand. The middle finger was abnormally short. Just the number of deaths is 4, but there are many more who were injured. I even lost a finger. If it wasn't for me, half of the people would have died already. But you guys decided to go out for a treasure hunt? That shield looks great, huh? Jiyoung mocked Taehwan, who was holding the shield of eradication. It wasn't like Taehwan had nothing to say. Even he himself fought with thousands of shrew mice before coming back. However, he wasn't able to open his mouth easily. It was because whatever he had to say would only be heard as an excuse to the others. Jiyoung had the lead. Muyang clicked his tongue. Then he approached Jiyoung. It was necessary to explore. Step aside, old man. I'm talking to Taehwan, the great humanitarian. This exploration was led by me. If you have anything to say, isn't it right for you to talk to me about it? Muyang just stood there and looked at him. The reason why Jiyoung was only after Taehwan was simple. In any case, it didn't seem like Muyang was going to make a group of his own, and he believed that the only person who would be in his way in becoming the king of this temple was Taehwan. Jiyoung, who felt Muyang's gaze, clenched his teeth, but then calmed himself and talked. A lot of people were depending on Taehwan. At least Taehwan shouldn't have gone out to explore. You make it sound like Taehwan is their nanny. No, not that, but there is something called a mentor. Those who can't survive on their own will die either way. They didn't even have to think about the underworld. Those who rely on others wouldn't even make it to the underworld and would die in the temple. As soon as you relied on someone and were satisfied, you would stop progressing and later be eaten by monsters. Also, the right to take care of others was given to only those who had the strength. Taehwan was definitely not strong. The weak helping each other out was something that existed only in fairy tales. In the underworld, only the strong could act as they want, as it was a world where the strong have absolute authority. So you're saying that it's okay for everyone to just die? The veins on Ji-young's neck bulged. Since he was already opposing Mu-young could tell that he was trying to sway the public to his side. Yes, those who can only survive by relying on others will only face even greater hellish conditions later on. However, Mu-young wasn't going to take back any of the words he said. Even Mu-young had spent 40 years living as an assassin without his will. Before he returned, the 40 years he went through was continuous torture. The days where he had to survive by even selling out his comrades. It was a blessing to just die now than to experience that again. Ha! Old man, you can probably live by yourself because you're strong. It's not that I am strong, it's just that you guys are weak. Mu-young asserted. The current Mu-young couldn't even compare to the Mu-young of the past. Even in the underworld, just looking at the physical abilities, there were countless people who were like monsters compared to him. Mu-young pointed at the scarecrows outside the temple. Was there anyone who trained on their own time? Didn't you guys give up right away after knowing there were monsters outside the temple? Whining is what kids do. If you weren't even going to try and be lousy about it, all that's left for you is to become monster meat. Even Susie, the youngest one here, didn't whine about anything. Instead, she tried to find a way to survive on her own. When Mu-young was hitting the scarecrows every day, no one had the determination to join him. It was because they believed that fighting the monsters that came every day was enough. Aren't you experienced? You were at the temple. Oh. Smack. Ji-young's body flew through the air. Thump. Ji-young, who unsightly fell on the ground, reached for his throat. Cough. He spasmed after getting hit unexpectedly on his chest. While Ji-young was struggling on the ground, Mu-young approached him and stepped on his belly. This is the wild. There are no rules or laws. If I was to kill you right now, who would be able to stop me? You need to learn to protect yourself. Please. Mu-young placed more strength on his foot. Ga. Ga. Ha. Ji-young's face was completely red. If Mu-young placed a bit more strength on his foot, the air inside Ji-young's body would flow upwards and impact his brain, killing him. Expressionlessly, Mu-young looked down on Ji-young. Ji-young's face filled with fear that he was going to die. Mu-young just lowered his head to look at Ji-young straight in the eye. Or, have you never thought that I could become your enemy? No one could stop Mu-young. This was the reality. Even if you were nice and split your resources, no one would dare to speak out to the strongest. If you wanted to change that kind of reality, you had to move. You had to strive harder than anyone else. Mu-young was willing to do that. Please. As Ji-young begged for mercy with his completely red face, Mu-young stepped away. Learn to be independent. I'm not expecting you to be strong. But don't hold back others who are trying to move forward. Mu-young turned around to enter the temple. There was a long silence that followed. No one could move. Some people who were able to gain sudden realization from Mu-young's speech started to move. Even if the numbers weren't great, due to them, new things were constantly being unveiled. It says that my strength has increased. My stamina has increased. Once people began to figure out that they could improve their stats by continuously hitting the scarecrow, many of them started to train themselves. Even if you had to hit at least 10,000 times for it to be of any effect, it was more productive than just standing still and wasting their time. Mu-young continued to explore every day, and whenever he returned, he started to build a fence. He fashioned wood into sharp spears and placed them around the temple. Although people were setting traps in preparation for the monster raids, they weren't very effective. Mu-young was preparing for the boss battle that will occur soon. There will be countless monsters that will attack before the boss comes out. This fence was made to interfere with the monsters' movements, even if only a little. Of course, it wouldn't have any effect if it was an ordinary wooden fence. However, Mu-young had gathered anesthetic flowers and rubbed its sap all around the fence. It had a strong anesthetic that would start to paralyze the body with a single touch. He also spread around Giant Leo's feces to confuse the monsters with its strong scent. As a predator of the forest, Giant Leo was at least one of the strongest monsters here. There were always going to be monsters raiding in once a day, but smelling the Leo's feces would definitely confuse them. Even though I had to risk my life, it was definitely a good idea to go to a Giant Leo's territory. If he was ever to be found by a Giant Leo, he wouldn't have been able to escape easily. But to make the boss battle a bit easier, he needed Giant Leo's feces. Mister, I'm done applying them. Also, the work of rubbing the feces on the fence was being done by Susie. Even if she was carrying a bin to do this, her whole body smelled strongly of feces. King. The Emperor of Shrew Mice, who Susie named King, stealthily avoided her. King knew instinctively to fear the Giant Leo. It was a task no one wanted to do. However, Susie volunteered to do it. Is this also her sense? However, would Susie know that this work will help her greatly in surviving? The one that emitted the scent of the Giant Leo the most was Susie. Even if you washed yourself vigorously, the scent wouldn't disappear for a few days. Monsters wouldn't be able to easily approach her. If she instinctively knew this and volunteered, her sense had to be quite astonishing. Muyang nodded as he glanced at the fences. Good job. Give me the bread a bit later, please. Also, she had 2 loaves of bread to receive. Susie looked behind Muyang for a moment and cautiously spoke to him. After practice, can I play with King? Kinning. Emperor of Shrew Mice. King's body was shivering pitifully. Muyang spoke without care. Do as you please. Yay. Thank you. He was still a kid. With a smile, Susie ran towards the scarecrows. Then, Muyang stood up as he rubbed his shoulders. All that's left is to wait. He had prepared everything he could. Not just Muyang, other people also did what they could in their own way. It was now a matter of how they could fight the boss battle with as little damage as possible. Growling. Gnar. Hundreds of 2-headed hyenas approached the temple. They were the species of monsters known as Shamba. The Shamba, who were running extremely fast, became confused after smelling the Giant Leo. Swift. Pluck. At the same time, a numerous number of arrows flew towards them from afar. People who were already waiting for them started to attack them with bow and arrows that they prepared at the last minute. Follow me. While the others were fighting the Shamba, Muyang unsheathed Anguish not too far away from the temple. He had to finish the job before monsters started to climb over the fence. Taehwan and Baeksu followed Muyang. As he wanted them to work as 2 separate forces, Susie stayed behind to help others. Kill them. Kill them all. From afar, Muyang could see Jiyang frantically fighting off the Shamba. While the Shamba's focus was on the group, Muyang quickly took a side route around. What Muyang was after wasn't the Shamba. It was the boss behind the Shamba. I will take the front. When I make the signal, come out. As he went further back, the number of Shamba decreased. And at the very back, the place where the temple and the forest met, there were 2 exceptionally large Shamba on the narrow pathway. Muyang had to quietly exterminate the 2. Muyang closed his eyes and tried to slow his heartbeat as much as possible. Even if he returned to the past, the experience he had was still intact. Hiding abilities were abilities Muyang had reached extreme levels in. There was no way he couldn't escape the eyes of such monsters like Shamba. Sniff. However, as Muyang approached them using his abilities, one of the Shamba noticed that something was wrong. Muyang quickly swung Anguish and sliced the Shamba's neck. Gah. It was the same for the other Shamba. As Muyang lifted his hand, the 2 men approached. How did you do this? How did they not notice you when you just walked towards them? Taehwan asked Muyang with disbelief. But Muyang didn't reply. After a while, he opened his mouth. Search the area. Since we killed the guards, it will now show up. Muyang was nervous very slightly. He was certain that there was a boss nearby leading the Shamba. However, he couldn't sense its presence. Instead, he felt a gaze. It's watching me. Drip. 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 And what Muyang thought was correct. There was a wall that blocked the narrow pathway. However, something was climbing down that wall. Prang. The Shamba had 2 heads, this thing had a staggering 3. It was at least twice the size of a regular Shamba. The formal appearance of the boss who led hundreds of Shamba. In an instant, messages popped up in front of them. Relaka has a great grudge on the humans. It will not stop his massacre until it kills all of mankind. Rolaka. If he remembered correctly, it seemed like it did have a name like that. In the past, from its attack, more than 10 people had died. Not because of the hundreds of Shamba, but because of this one monster. I was waiting for you. However, Muyang believed that it was possible with 3 people. The predator of the past, now it was its turn to get hunted.